Hey there, everyone. It's the Economancer, here to bring you a little bit of difference this time. So, normally we go over stuff like economics, sociology, public policy, stuff like that, but today I want to focus on something completely different, completely out of the left field, I guess you could say, and I want to focus on one of my favorite card games, Magic the Gathering. And what I want to point out is what I think one of the biggest blunders in Magic history is. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of backstory on Azor the Lawbringer, and then I'm going to explain why I think this was a blunder. All right, so at one time there was this near all-powerful planeswalker who was a Sphinx. His name was Azor. Nobody's really sure where he comes from, and he kind of just shows up in the multiverse. So his background in magic is hieromancy and law magic. So, moving into this backstory a little bit more, he would travel the multiverse as a planeswalker, which means he could travel from plane to plane through kind of a teleportation in the Immaterium. Like, no, that's Warhammer 40k. The Blind Eternities. I swear, those are really similar, which is funny because Warhammer 40k's got a set coming out in October, I think, which is cool. So essentially, he traveled all over the universe or multiverse, whatever you want to call it, and created a bunch of colonies or civilizations, depends on how you want to kind of think of this. And he used his law magic to create the conditions for civilization to follow some strict set of rules and laws so that they can prosper. And so he does this all over the place. And so the most famous example is he goes to Ravnica, which is one of the major blocks for Magic the Gathering. And it's a plane with a bunch of factions or guilds that are at constant war. And so he shows up and he gets all of the guilds to come together and he binds them all in a contract, this guild pact. And so he really stops all of this crazy war. Now, don't get it twisted. There's still some conflict going on behind the scenes, but a lot of it is behind the scenes, and there's some push and pull here and there. But eventually, he feels like it's set up enough, and he's got the guild pact, which is strong enough in his opinion. So he leaves. And about that time that he leaves, that's when it kicks off well, probably a little bit before he leaves. Anyway, so it starts going into chaos, and then all of these events happen, so on and so forth. And that's where the story gets really bad. So prior to him being printed in an actual card, and actually going through the period when it was Ixalan block, so prior to that, there wasn't a whole lot of backstory. What we did know that he was a friend of Ugin, the spirit dragon, and what's kind of given to us throughout the story is that Ugin and Azor, they were coming together to defeat Ugin's brother, Nicobolus. And the backstory there is Nicobolus is the really bad guy. He killed his brother Ugin, which is why he's a spirit dragon, so on and so forth. Nicobolus is just the bane of the existence of the multiverse. So Azor sets up this plan. He's going to sacrifice his ability to be a planeswalker to create an artifact, the Immortal Sun, that will stop a planeswalker from being able to activate their planeswalker abilities, right? So what it seems so far in this story is that Azor is the good guy. But that's not the way it's actually written in the lore. So basically, they have this other planeswalker, Jace. He shows up on this island in Ixalan to get the Immortal Sun, and he bumps into Azor. Now, what we kind of know is that Jace is now the living guild pack. He went through and he was the one to solidify the Ravnican allegiances after it all collapsed and the guild pact fell. So he was the binding agent now. And because of that powers, him being the living guild pack, he now has powers over all of the guilds. And technically, Azor is the Perun or the head of the Azorius guild. And so they end up getting into like this mental battle, and Jace is considered like the strongest mental mage in the universe outside of Nicol Bolas, and he barely defeats Azor, but when he does, he locks him down with his guild pack powers and says, hey, you can never leave this cave ever again. And you need to sit there and you need to think about all of these civilizations that you tried to start, that you set up with your laws, and all of this that went down like hell in a handbasket. You know, they just all collapsed after he'd left, kind of thing. And he told him, hey, you know, you tried to control all of these civilizations and make them what you want. And so now you have to sit here and think about what all you've done. And so you're stuck sitting there reading this and you're like, all right, so we have this mega threat that is Ugin's brother. And then we have Azor, who's willing to give up his power to stop the threat. Now, even if it isn't altruism, even if he just wants to stop the threat so that it doesn't harm his work, that still is no reason for him to be the bad guy in this, right? And then you know, it's ridiculous to me. Now, here's some of the things about this. A lot of this comes down to like a political alignment. So I'm going to explain some of this through the color system that Magic the Gathering uses. So Magic the Gathering has 5 colors: green, blue, black, red, white. And they all symbolize something similar to a personality disposition. So Azor in this context is a blue-white planeswalker. So we have blue that is about perfection. You know, it's about the seeking of perfection, knowledge, that kind of thing. And then we have white. White's about order, and it's usually order and like a lot of numbers kind of thing, and, you know, very religious leaning. And then when you combine blue and white, you kind of have this perfection through order, or order through perfection, however you really want to lay it out. But essentially, you're kind of removing some of that religious element. And then you have blue, which has this knowledge context. So you have law that comes from white, and then you have blue, where it's kind of like, how can we manipulate the law to make sure that it's better and better and better? And that's what it's meant to embody. And that's what Azor is meant to embody, is this seeking of perfect law through constant change and knowledge. Now, it may come as a shock to many people that blue-white doesn't mean that the person is a good guy. But something to keep in mind, and something that makes it more difficult for me to find as good of an argument here, is that what Magic has done with, or what Wizards have done in the past few years, is they've really kind to represent blue-white as the bad guys. They really do try to portray them often as the bad guys. Now, there is still Teferi, who's probably the most powerful of all of the current planeswalkers, right? Who is blue-white, who is a good guy. He's probably the best guy. Him and Jace are right there. Really, Jace and the Super Friends is what this whole story is about as we're going forth, even though they've kind of pushed Jace off to the side a little bit. But everybody knows it's all about Jace. But anyway, the point is like, you've got in the Ravnica story, a big focus was that the good guy in that was the blue and black, which is the Dimir colors. Now, what that would be is perfection, which is blue, and you have black, which is, you know, self-service. It's narcissism. The only thing that you're trying to get is power, and you get it for yourself, whereas white is kind of like, I want power for everyone, you know? It's kind of an equality thing. Okay, so what are my issues with all of this, outside of them trying to subvert expectations on what is a good guy and a bad guy? Because, you know, there's a lot of nuances, but So if you look at a lot of the old lore, it really points to Azor being some like symbolic representation of God from the Old Testament. And what was, I think, was set up is that this sacrifice was initially meant to be some symbol of fulfilling the law. Because he was no longer able to bind people through his law magic because he was no longer a planeswalker, so he didn't have that additional power. But what ended up happening is they just made him look like a complete jerk, and wizards will continue to try to subvert expectations. Uh, and so we now have to think about this. Why are they trying to subvert the expectations? Because again, blue-white stands for law and order. If you are a difficult political persuasion, law and order are going to be anathema. So why does this bother me? And why am I making a video about it? Well, first, because I think the symbolism that I explained earlier, that of the the Old Testament and the fulfillment of the law would actually make more sense when it comes to the logic of the stories. I don't know why he couldn't go out and die, bear something, try to right his wrongs or anything like that. Just to kind of leave him in a cave with Jace, just going, "You're bad. Think of all the bad things you did," as if he doesn't have some understanding that the things he did didn't work, right? Uh, Second, there's a good amount of evidence here that blue-white is typically associated with conservative right-wing politics, especially when you look at the Azorius Guild. It's kind of set up to be this bureaucratic machine that has so many laws and bylaws and so much regulation, and that it's supposed to really benefit like the 1% kind of thing, and it fundamentally works on this idea of the law is the best thing that there is. And again, when we think about these colors of blue and white, we have perfection through order, but we leave out the other colors. So we don't have self-service, and we don't have red, which is emotions, and we don't have green, which is tradition. So when we remove those three colors, we're just left with this rampant growth of bureaucracy that needs to be undergirded by something else, which is why we have 5 colors, which is every person is 5 colors. But there's something missing there. And this is usually targeted at right-wing politics. Like, there's something missing there, even though right-wing politics would probably have green in it, probably more green than it does blue, but all of this is besides the point. All right, third, and this is kind of like the moral case. If someone's trying to make the world a better place and it always fails, are you to blame the person trying to make the world a better place, or are you going to blame the people who consistently undermine the goals and the rules that was set up to maintain order itself? Now think about it this way. When we see society and we see criminals, do we go, society has failed these criminals, or have these criminals failed society? If someone commits an infraction or breaks the law or does something, we typically focus on them doing something wrong rather than blaming the system itself. Now, if you think about current politics, there is a lot of blaming the system itself rather than individual responsibility for what happens. And so this can be used as a scapegoat. Like, oh, look, the law is too hard. No one can live under the law, so we should just get rid of the law anyway. So with that, I don't find it reasonable, nor do I find it justified that he's going to cross the multiverse and try to establish law and order in all these places, and eventually they fail because he leaves and they can't live up to law. And again, this is an idea that's expressed throughout the entire scripture of the Bible. No one is good enough under the law because we're all sinners. That was the original intent of Azor as a character. It was not meant to be some megalomaniac who was trying to control everything and everyone for his own benefit. It was meant to be a symmetric symbol of God, of God from the Bible in this fantasy setting. And instead of having him die trying to right wrongs or trying to lead some point of justification or anything like that, they let the character just dwindle into nothingness. And then we also have to think that this may be like an entirely concerted effort to destroying what was once created for a certain symbol that is now subverted to symbolize almost the opposite of it, right? And that bothers me because if he would have been blue-black, it would have made sense, right? That he was doing this for selfless reasons. And this gets into a lot of the arguments about consequentialism. Do we validate someone who's trying to do the right thing in their mind if it causes a lot of harm. How do we as a society deal with that? Well, we would normally hold elections. We would have some consensus that go into it. It wouldn't be so much about conflict. It would be about the resolving of conflict, that resolution, that consensus that we all come to so we can find a more reasonable, a more just, more equal, and more justified existence together in society. And again, that's all about establishing law and order. But what they gave him was something like, you're doing this wrong, therefore you will spend eternity in a cave. I just don't think that this punishment is justified. If there was to be a punishment, I think his death would have been good, right? Because then we don't have this character there now. But now we have this character that could eventually be brought back. It's a possibility. Somebody can go find him. Somebody can say, "Hey, look, I found Azor." And then now, man, what's going on? Oh, it's probably got to kill y'all's ears. So now we have this idea that he's out there. Someone's going to find him and try to use him. And now he's going to be a bad guy because initially he was just trying to do the right thing, or what he thought was the right thing. And now he's been lambasted and left to rot in a cave. So he's going to come back and he's going to be the big villain or something like that, somewhere along the lines. And that just bothers me immensely. And I don't know why they had set it up that way. It didn't need to be that way. There could have been better ways to go about this. I think him dying, or some type of resurrection narrative, or some type of law fulfillment narrative would have made more sense. And that's something that's always bothered me with some of the writing that's come out of Wizards recently, especially if you look at like New Capenna and stuff like that. And if you don't know Magic, some of this is just random jargon thrown at you. But if you do know Magic, you do see that there's a lot of weird things going on in the writings, right? So the New Capenna, they have demons that are the head of these 5 families, which they're mob bosses, and it's kind of weird. But one of them is Falco Spara, who's blue, green, and white. Right, so that's like traditionalist with a heavy focus on law and order. So law, order, and tradition. What undergirds the law and order is the traditions that people follow, kind of thing. And it's a demon, which is typically a black colored card, right? Because demons, you can sell your soul to a demon so you can obtain power, kind of thing. Or blood magic and stuff like that. It typically falls into black. But now we have what is supposed to be a Lawbringer, because he's Falco Spara, the Pact Weaver, because he's kind of the law mage that's over New Capenna, is now a demon. And you're just sitting there going, I get it. This is like that George R.R. Martin, subvert your expectations. Anything that you will love will be destroyed kind of thing. But it has to be justified in the storytelling, and it's not justified in the storytelling. Just like the story of Azor's end is not justified in the storytelling. You can say, hey, it's open for interpretation, and that's fine. But the logic does not follow in much of this, and that is the biggest problem. And not just Magic, but in a lot of new media that keeps being pushed out. I see this constantly, this subversion of expectations. The good guy is the bad guy is the good guy. So let's flip and inverse everything. And then, we have to build nuances into everything. And then we look at stuff done by C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, and we see that they didn't really have much nuance. They had, this is a good guy, this is a bad guy, some of the best stories you'll ever read. So maybe we should take a step back and stop trying to subvert expectations. Maybe we should take a step back and kind of bank on some of those old archetypes and really focus on what they meant, rather than trying to invent new stuff constantly at our own peril, because we're really losing sight of what's good and what's bad. And again, that's not to say that what Azor does is justified, but what Azor did doesn't justify the punishment that he receives. Because you can imagine eternity right? Eternity by yourself in a cave for the crime of trying to help the multiverse. I could see if he was sacrificing people or destroying lives or something, but all of these places didn't collapse until after he left. Maybe we shouldn't blame him entirely. Maybe some of the blame should be put on all of us, because none of us live up to the law and none of us are good enough for the law. And with that, thank you for taking a walk with me through the Economicon or the Blind Eternities or the Immaterium or wherever we're going this time, and talking about Azor the Lawbringer. Please like, share, subscribe. Tell me what you think. You should look it up, write down a comment, and see how it goes. And thank you for watching.